Vai fazer a... Então, beleza, galera. Esse aqui é o trabalho do Adam. Ok. Na verdade, eu acho que a tela dele tá travada. Né? Uma falha, a little failure of special effects. Né? Efeitos especiais também falham de vez em quando. Ok? All right. Okay, now.
This is more than I can take. Thank you.
Galera, vou falar uma coisa. Se você tá aqui na Campus Party e não gosta de nenhum desses filmes, você tá no lugar errado. Tá certo? Então, esse cara é um cara absolutamente fenomenal. Com vocês, um dos maiores e mais importantes pioneiros do cinema, tá certo? Dos efeitos especiais, Adam Howard.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. Hi, folks. Okay, you guys are insane. You're all insane. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm just going to switch this monitor over to another one. Hold on one sec. Can I see this monitor, guys? Just. This will make it much easier for everybody. It's there, okay. Yeah. It should be there. The only thing is I've got to run it here. Okay, excellent. Okay, thanks, man. Okay, thanks for having me at Campus Party. I'm a little wonky. I just got off the plane at 1:30 this afternoon after a 12-hour flight from Los Angeles. But this is insanely cool. So this is me. The talk that I'm going to give is basically about the last 35 years of my life doing visual effects and animation for features and TV and commercials and music videos, you name it, theme parks, everything. I want to thank Eagle Moss first, because they brought me out here. So thank you guys for doing that. That's wonderful. Also, you don't know who any of these guys are. Well, maybe one of them you do. But I like to thank them when I do these things because these are the people who are my mentors. We'll talk about mentors later on, but they're incredibly important. I try to be one to people. It's kind of one of the reasons I'm here today. But anyway, we'll get back to these guys later on. So, it all began, I was born. Born in Melbourne in 1962. And we moved to Japan for 3 years. And we lived in Tokyo for 3 years when I was 5, 6, 7. And that's kind of where all the madness began for me. I watched the NHK TV network in Japan, which was the main network there. And there were tons of great TV shows on for kids. There was this one particular show, and each week they would do a fairy tale. And it was a different fairy tale each week. And they would pick interesting casting of kids so that the stories were interesting for the Japanese kids who were watching. So this particular week, they did a story about a little princess who was kidnapped and by 8 ninja warriors, and then two brave young samurai come out and they save her. The interesting thing about the casting was that this little guy is me. I was 5 years old, and I like to tell this story because the guy with his back to the camera in the middle is the director. And I had my very first argument with a director when I was 5 years old. All the ninja warriors were given real swords, and we were given these stupid little plastic inflatable swords. And so I'm standing there talking to the director going, this isn't fair. Either we all have real swords or we all have plastic swords. And he just goes, shut up, kid, just do the scene. Of course, I just wanted a real sword. Needless to mention, I did not get a real sword, and the two of us killed the 8 of them with our plastic swords in 15 seconds. It was spectacular. Anyway, like 30 years later, I met him again, and we made up. While I was watching TV in Japan, I met these 3 guys for the first time. The original Star Trek, which obviously you all know. I had no idea the impact that this show was going to have on my life. But watching, the initial impact was big because I was watching it in Japanese. So Mr. Spock and Kirk in Japanese is quite bizarre. So golden age for children's television. There were so many great shows at the time that were really influencing me. I was telling one of the guys earlier on tonight that my mother used to say to me, you're never going to get anywhere watching the idiot box, watching TV. I kind of proved her wrong. But you know, Ultraman, Gigantor, they're actually just about to do a new TV series of Ultraman. They're about to do a new TV series, actually a feature film of Astro Boy. Herculoids was a great series, like Puff and Stuff, Looney Tunes, Jetsons, Thunderbirds. Flintstones, Batman, the live action shows as well, they were great. Lost in Space, one of my favorites. And all these shows were just kind of creating like images and ideas in my mind of what I was going to do later in life. So cinema was good too. I mean, you may not necessarily like the films, but technologically they were doing some incredible things. Like the first use of real process screens, like green screen. It was actually a yellow screen called a sulfur screen in Mary Poppins. Love Bug, some amazing mechanical gags. Tom Thumb, making this normal-sized guy look very, very small. And my favorite film of all time, Time Machine, with probably the coolest time machine ever made, which is now owned by a mate of mine who lives in Burbank, and I go over to his house once in a while and sit in the chair and pretend I'm Rod Taylor. The other cool thing about this film was that Rod Taylor, who played the lead role, was an Australian. So I always felt a kinship with him, and unfortunately Rod died 2 weeks ago, so very sad to have lost him. So after Japan, went back to Australia, went to school. There's me in the middle looking like a total dork. But there was a lot of magic going on in the world. There was one incredibly magical event that was going to bring the entire planet together. It was Apollo 11. And I remember sitting on the living room floor of my grandparents' house, watching these guys fly to the moon, climb out, stand on the moon, walk on it, and it completely blew my mind. So that was like one whole form of like real magic that was getting me. Then there was magic. I was watching TV shows and inspired by people like Mark Wilson and Doug Henning and Harry Houdini. I always loved magic and illusion as a way of storytelling. And just the fact that you could just make things happen that seemed completely impossible were amazing to me. The guy who first taught me that was this guy, Gerald Taylor. He was an American magician who'd retired to Australia and opened this little magic shop. I met him when I was 10 years old, and I walked in for my first lesson and I said, "What tricks are you going to teach me?" And he said this to me. He said, anybody can buy a trick, take it home, learn it, call themselves a magician, but that's not real magic. And he put a coin in the center of his hand, and he said, "Just watch this." And he put the coin there, and he closed it, and he said, "Blow in my hand," and I blew on it, and he opened it, and the coin was gone. And my eyes just went, "Googa." And he said, "That's magic. That moment right there in your eye is magic." And he said, "I'm not going to teach you how to do tricks. I'm going to teach you how to create magic." So that was like a first real mentor thing in my mind of illusion and what you could do with it, because it was an incredibly powerful thing. The biggest effect that anything had on any of our lives of my generation was Star Wars. George created not only this world to tell his stories, and he created his whole own universe. And with characters that have just stood the test of time. They're still making them. I mean, J.J. Abrams is doing the new one now. I was talking to J.J. a couple of nights ago at the Visual Effects Society Awards, and he is so jazzed about the new one. And you're going to love it. It's off the charts. But other people were doing the same thing. Jim Henson was creating his own world with the Muppets. Stephen was doing Jaws and scaring people off beaches all over the world. Peter Weir, who many of you may not know, he's an Australian director. He directed this film that came out the same week that Jaws came out, called Picnic at Hanging Rock. It's a scary film, and it's just about girls walking around in the country in pretty dresses and disappearing. But it influenced me greatly as a piece of filmmaking, and we'll get back to Peter later on. At the same time I was influenced by all of that, I started working at Melbourne Theatre Company. I was acting and doing backstage stuff and doing a lot of acting. We split off and we started this thing called St. Martin's Theatre Company. It's now called the St. Martin's Youth Arts Centre, and it's the biggest youth theatre in Australia. And it was run by this guy. Now, you may not necessarily know who Helmut Bakaitis is when you just look at his face, but any of you who've ever watched The Matrix would know exactly who he is, because he's the architect. And so I've known Helmut since I was 15. He's a dear friend of mine, and another big mentor for me. Probably the biggest moment for my life happened with my high school art teacher. This guy, Rick Roughton, I don't have a photo of him because there aren't any. But he was the one that really just said, you're really good at art, you're really good at filmmaking, you should do that as a career. And so he pushed me off in the direction of doing that. by doing a graphic design course. So I did a degree in graphic design. And so to put myself through that course, I played this crazy character for 7 years out on the streets of Melbourne in Australia. He was 9 feet tall, about 110 degrees inside the suit every day. Way too bloody hot to do, but I did it for 7 years, and it was a lot of fun. I was also working on this mural, which is in Melbourne. It's a mosaic mural, and it's made up of 2.5 million hand-cut pieces of Venetian glass. And we had 2,000 individual colors, so the difference between each color was microscopic. And my job, that's me up in the top right, my job was to cut these big pallets of glass into small pieces and then put them in their own separate buckets in all 2,000 colors. And then all the fire in this mural, I did all the fire of it. And to give you an idea of the scale, the circle up above Zeus's head, this is Harold Friedman who designed it. That's the circle above his head. So, you know, each one of these pieces is about that big. Tiny little thing, all hand cut. Cut our fingers to ribbons, but it was a great project, and it's been sitting there since 1980, and it's still there, and it still looks like it was done yesterday. So, right in 1980, I got my first job in television at ABC Television in Melbourne. Oh, and the note on that is no computers of any kind. A convention like this didn't exist, hadn't even been thought of, because there were no computers. There was no Mac, there was no IBM, there was nothing. I was doing news and weather graphics, so you know, you see the graphic over the newsreader's shoulder, and I did all of those, and the weather maps, I did all of those. But it did them all. This was our tool set. You know, pens and pencils and scalpels and cutting boards and paint and airbrush and rulers. And what we didn't know was that coming down the track behind all this stuff was a whole new way of doing things. I was sitting in the office one day, and the art director said to me, I need you to come in and close the door and sit down. And I thought I was going to get fired. And he said, no, you're not going to get fired. I know that look on your face. He said, you see that huge box in the corner? And they delivered this thing like 2 weeks before, and it had just been sitting there. We didn't know what to do with it. And I said, what is that thing? And he said, they say it's a computer that does graphics, which to us was just ridiculous, because the only systems that we'd seen were kind of CAD systems for architecture, which was so primitive you couldn't do anything with them, really. So we had a good chuckle about that. But what it actually turned out to be was the Quantel paint box. Quantel paint box was the very first time that you could use a pen and a tablet. I mean, the tablet weighed about as much as this stage. It was ridiculous. The pen was solid steel. It was on a steel cable, and you'd literally hold it up and gouge into the tablet. But you could paint on the screen, and it was the first time you could ever do that. When this box came out, the one that we had with us at ABC was the 5th one on the planet. There were literally 5 digital paint computers on the planet, and until that day, 4 artists on the planet. I became the 5th digital artist on the planet. And so everything we were doing was kind of creating a whole new world of working in television and creating graphics. This thing that the guy's holding is called a Winchester drive. It had the massive memory of 50 megs, which blew our minds. 50 whole megs? Oh my God, you can save like 3 images on that. Wow. It was so noisy, we had to build a separate room that was soundproofed, because we could not work with this thing like roaring next to us. Anyway, so using this new technology, I ended up working on a kind of iconic Australian television show called Countdown. Countdown was like the Australian version of American Bandstand, or way before MTV. And it was hosted by a guy called Ian Meldrum. His nickname's Molly. And Molly kind of founded the Australian record industry and discovered tons of famous people. I mean, Michael Jackson was known as part of the Jackson 5, but he was not really known as a separate artist in his own right. And he was one of the people that Molly helped put on the international stage. Hosted by, voiceovers by this guy Gavin Wood, who's now my business partner in Los Angeles. So we've known each other for 35 years. But these are some of the people that, they're old acts now, but in the 80s and 90s, they were huge acts. And Molly helped put all of these people, including Madonna and INXS, on the international stage. So after Countdown, I worked on another music show called Rock Arena. It's the Rock Arena logo up in the top right-hand corner. The interesting thing about this show was that it was the very first time a logo for a show that was shown physically on a set had been completely computer generated. So the whole logo was illustrated originally on the paint box, and then we gave it to the art department and they made big cutouts of it and hung it in the set. But also the main title was the very first time that a main title had been done as a CG piece of animation, in the Southern Hemisphere at least. So this is the animation we did. It's stretched, unfortunately. It's not the right aspect ratio, but believe you me, at the time, this was state-of-the-art animation. Incredibly simple now. Whole thing was animated on the Cray XMP computer, and I think at the time there were 3 or 4 of these in the world. One was in Melbourne, the others were in the UK and the United States. The day after we finished doing our main title, the Australian Air Force came in and they bought it for the next 20 years to do flight simulations. And one of the ones in the States now is in the Smithsonian Museum, so I feel really old. We did lots of comedy shows, more comedy shows. And then I left ABC and went to AAV. AAV was Armstrong Audiovisual. It was the biggest audiovisual company in the Southern Hemisphere. And we did, you name it, we did it. Australian children's television series, Round the Twist. I did music videos for In Excess and the Rolling Stones. It was a really great experience. One of the best things, though, was that they asked me to do a demo reel for the department. Remember this trick, guys. I said, well, I don't want to do a compilation of shots because everybody does that for a reel. I want to do a little movie. And so they said, well, come up with a story and we'll think about it. So I went out to lunch that day, I wrote a little script, and it was like a 9-minute movie. Pitched it to them that day, and they said, okay, yeah, fine. They shut the department down for 3 months, and they paid me for 3 months to make this demo reel, which I then brought to the United States and got my first job with. So that was taking the big leap. 1990, moved to Los Angeles with very big and probably completely ridiculous dreams. I was staying at this hotel, a really skanky little hotel in the middle of Hollywood, right behind the Chinese theater. So behind the Walk of Fame and the Chinese theater, and very close to the Hollywood sign. But the dreams were insane for everybody else, but very focused for me. I wanted to work on Star Trek: The Next Generation, which at the time was the biggest sci-fi show, if not the biggest TV show on the planet. I wanted to work on MacGyver, because who wouldn't want to work on MacGyver? And I wanted to work at Industrial Light and Magic. Absolutely true. Everybody at home thought I was completely off my rocker. But I got a job, within 7 months of being in the country, I got a job at this company called Digital Magic as the assistant animator to the lead animator on Star Trek: The Next Generation. After the first week, he came in on a Friday and he said, so look, it's been really good working with you, and thank you for being here, and I'm leaving. I'm going to ILM. And he was going up to do the fairy dust on Tinkerbell for Hook. And so I went home that weekend, had a very depressing weekend. I thought I was going to get fired on Monday. The other company I worked at was POP. But the boss came in on Monday and he said, well, I've got very good news and very, very bad news. And I said, oh, God, what's the bad news? He says, well, bad news is that Paramount Pictures is really pissed off with Steve for leaving. And I said, well, then what's the good news? And he goes, the good news is you're it. So after 1 week, I became the lead animator on Star Trek. And 1 month after that, I became the lead animator on MacGyver. So sitting in Captain Picard's chair, you want a geek out moment, that's pretty cool. The ultimate geek out moment, though, was that day I also had my mother with me, who was visiting from Australia, and I had her sit in Captain Picard's chair. Very strange. Sitting on the transporter pad. Now, for all you Trek lovers out there, I don't know if you know this little bit of trivia about the transporter set from Next Generation, but the ceiling of the transporter set on Next Generation is the original floor from the 1960s series. they decided to put it in there as a little tribute to the series and have part of the original series in there. So every time you saw the transporter pad, you were seeing Kirk and Spock's transporter pad as well. So within the first year, I won 2 Emmys, which was insane for me. I got nominated twice, and we won both of them on the same night. So, you know, dream big, they can absolutely come true. A lot of these people went on to do very good things. Rob Stromberg, the guy here on the left, directed Maleficent last year. Eric Nash, second from the right on the bottom, was the visual effects supervisor on Night at the Museum this past year. And all the other guys have gone on to do great things. So that's my 4 sitting at my pool in LA. They don't sit by the pool all the time. A friend of mine took that for me. That would just be really obnoxious, wouldn't it? Come and sit by the pool and look at my Emmys. Hang on, I just need to polish that. No. So, the thing about Trek and technology, and it kind of ties into this convention, is think about the things that they invented in Trek and think about the similarities in real life. You look at 1966 and he had this little communicator, stupid little piece of plastic that now sells for $100,000 on an auction site. But in 2003, there was a cell phone that looked the same and actually worked. 1987, Captain Picard holding his, actually called a pad. Same size, same job as what Steve Jobs came up with in 2010. 1988, view screens, and then teleconferencing in 2008. Wearable communicators to Google Glass. I mean, sci-fi has this incredible ability to come up with ideas that we have the money to go out and make real. It's not really real, but on screen it's real, and then somebody else goes and looks at the screen and goes, holy shit, we could make that real. Case in point, Silent Running. Silent Running was, I think, made in 1978, and it was directed by Doug Trumbull, who was also the visual effects supervisor on 2001. It's about the Earth's last remaining forests, and there's been a nuclear war, and so they save all the forests, put them in these domes on a big ship, and send them out to space and try to find somewhere else to put them. The cool thing about the movie was that Bruce Dern ends up killing everybody in the crew, and he's left with these 3 robots called Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Now, the robots were played by car accident amputees, people who've been literally chopped off at the waist in car accidents. And so this is a guy inside this thing, and his hands came out the side, and they'd plug legs on him, and he'd walk around the set on his hands. The cool thing about the robots was that they had this mechanical arm on the front of them. And there's a scene where Bruce Dern gets injured, and he has to be operated on by one of the robots. And so Doug, the director, went to his dad, Don, who, you know, one of Don's claims to fame was that he was the guy holding the fishing rod that dangled the Cowardly Lion's tail behind him in The Wizard of Oz. And he was an old-style special effects guy. And he said, look, I want this arm on the front of the robot, and I need you to make something that will do that. So Don designed this arm, and this is the arm that he built. A couple of weeks after the movie was released, a group of doctors went out for a night just to go and see a movie. And they saw this thing, and they called the studio the next day, and they said, what the hell is that arm? And who designed that? Because we want to talk to them. They got in touch with Don, and they found out what it was. And it turns out that these guys were the leading developers of prosthetic limbs in the world, and they'd been trying for 15 years to develop a robotic arm that could do exactly what this did. And so they teamed up with Don, and this arm from Silent Running became the basis of all prosthetic arms that were used on accident victims until about 10 years ago. Another innovator was this great guy, Linwood Dunn. I had the extreme pleasure of meeting him in the early 90s when he was about 94, just a couple of years before he died. And Lynn, literally, Lynn was this high. He was a tiny little man, very heavily English accent. But in the 1920s, he invented my job. He invented the Acme Dunn optical printer, where any of you who know about compositing, you take multiple layers of images and you stick them together. On an optical printer, it would be a roll of film with a background, and a roll of film with a foreground, and a roll of film with a matte, projecting light through all of those, recording onto another roll of film. And then you just do that layer after layer after layer. This is the optical printer that he built, and on this he did incredible visual effects for these films: King Kong, Citizen Kane, West Side Story, 2001. Just absolutely amazing stuff. So I was talking to him one night, and I said, what is the one guiding principle that you would give me for a long career in visual effects? And he said, oh, that's easy. You spend your entire life doing shots that no one notices. I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? And he said, the second someone looks at a shot in a movie and they go, wow, what a cool visual effect shot, you failed. Because you've taken them out of the story. And he said, my boy, you only have one purpose in this job, and that's to serve the story. And he said, as long as you are invisible your entire career, you'll be around for a long time. So I tried to do invisible work always. Back on Star Trek, state-of-the-art was still miniatures. There was no CG yet in the early 90s. So we were shooting miniatures with motion control at a company called Image G in Hollywood. Then we would comp the shots together, and I was doing all the phases off the Enterprise, and phases from people, and phases, so many phases. I think I did like 7,000 phaser shots over 8 years, but redesigned the whole look of them. One of the things that I incorporated into the show was interactive light, so that they just felt like they were more real. My favorite ship from Star Trek, from Deep Space Nine, the Defiant. I designed all the rocket cannons that came out of it. So I worked on all 4 series and won the 4 Emmys for 2 of the shows, and I supervised First Contact and was a consultant on Insurrection. I apologize for Insurrection. It's so bad. But hey, they can't all be good. So worked on other shows at the same time. Worked on Baywatch and Lois and Clark, which was it was the very first 16:9 HD format show ever made in the world, and it created its whole own slew of digital technical problems. One of the things that people always asked us was, how do you make his cape billow out behind him like that? Well, we hung him from a wire, and we blew the wind down and just turned the camera on its side and made him fly. Real old school, guys. This was the first show that we also did a hookup between a live Dean Cain flying away, hooking up into a CG Dean Cain. And the guys who were doing the work came into me one day, and they'd done their first animation test, and they said, oh my God, you're going to love this. It's so cool. I looked at the thing, and Superman's flying like this. It's like just planks of wood. And so I brought in some old Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny cartoons, and I said, look at the way they move, and they never stop moving, and it's all fluid. And make them look like that. They'll be fine. They did that, and they ended up winning an Emmy for it. Worked Tales from the Crypt. I did many episodes of that show. My favorite one, though, was this one with Tim Curry. Tim Curry played all 3 characters. The ugly sister, the mother, and the father. So some pretty heavy-duty compositing involved in that show. X-Files, which they're about to start remaking, and I'm trying to get on, because I would love to work on that show again. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Angel, a few other things, Jim Henson's Dinosaurs. Working with Jim's son, Brian, who was directing the series. Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, did a whole bunch of stuff for that. So that was all TV. Right at the same time that was happening, the people developing technology in the background were thinking, well, this is good for TV, but how about film? We had been doing film work on TV boxes and then upraising it to 2K for film. But it was soft and it didn't really look right. And so Quantel came out with this box called the Domino. The Domino was the very first time you could do feature film resolution work in visual effects, and it was staggering. I mean, we went on and we did, I worked on these movies, a lot of stuff on Cliffhanger. There were a couple of shots in the demo reel from Cliffhanger, Dracula, The River Wild. In The River Wild, I don't know how many of you have seen it, but the whole movie is a race, Meryl Streep racing down the Colorado River to get to this massive waterfall. The waterfall that they actually shot was only 20 feet high. And the director hated it, and he came to me and he said, we got to fix this thing. It's crap. It looks stupid. We spent a whole movie getting to this 20-foot thing. It looks like a wading pool. So I took all the footage that they had shot of water, and I did this big patchwork composite of a waterfall that's like 300 feet high. And that's the one that's in the movie. Star Trek First Contact, which many people think is the best Star Trek film. I don't disagree. Apollo 13. So, Discrete Logic, at the same time, decided we're going to compete with all the TV stuff that Quantel is using, like the Harry and Henry and those boxes. They came up with Flame. Flame just blew everything out of the water. It changed the whole face of compositing. It was like full-on non-linear editing. On Harry, if you composited something, the Quantel box, if you composited something, you would put all the layers together, and if you didn't like it, you had to go all the way back to the beginning and comp up to that point, make a tweak, and then keep going. And you have to rebuild it every time. With Flame, you could just slide into that one layer, change it, and it revolutionized compositing. So did hundreds of TV commercials, actually probably thousands of commercials over the years. Music videos for Springsteen, Gypsy Kings, Billy Joel, LL Cool J, Harry Connick Jr., Bobby McFerrin. Of course, Michael Jackson. Working with Michael was insanely cool. He was a great guy. So right at the same time, one of my producers came into me, and you guys are going to like this bit. I know the other stuff's kind of boring, but he said, we've got this show. It's an animated show, and the producers want to have some like handwriting in the show, and you've got good handwriting. Do you want to do this? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I became the handwriting of Bart Simpson. I wrote all of the chalkboards for Bart Simpson, for The Simpsons. So, you know, every time you ran into the classroom in the opening titles, it's my writing. This is one of my favorites. And this one. It was a fun show to work on. I think I did about 200 of those things. Around the same time, I had my two kids. Sam on the left is now 23, and my daughter's 18. And how does that happen? I was also a founding member of the Visual Effects Society, and we're now in our like 20-something, 25th year maybe. And it's going strong. We started off with 30 members. We've now got 3,000 worldwide. So Discrete Logic had come up with Flame. Then they thought, well, we can't have Quantel owning film compositing with Domino. We'll come up with our own box. So they came up with this box called Inferno, which was basically Flame's big brother. It was Flame on steroids. Flame was off the charts insane because it again changed film compositing forever. The first big job I got to do was this. Jim Cameron came to me with this little movie he was putting together. The little movie was Titanic. I was working on a bunch of other shots, and he came to me with this one, or one of the producers came to me with this shot, and they said, we have a problem. Jim shot this shot, and for insurance reasons, they couldn't use Kate and Leo, because it was literally a steel-walled set, painted to look like wood, with 200,000 gallons of water dumping into it from dump tanks up the back. So they had stunt doubles run down the hallway. So the bodies are the bodies of stunt doubles. But we had to get rid of their heads and replace them with Kate and Leo's heads. Jim Cameron owned Digital Domain visual effects company at the time, and he went to the company and he said, so I want you to take this wet shot of the stunt guys and these two dry shots of Kate and Leo and make this shot. And they looked at him and they said, it's impossible. You cannot do this shot. So he went, okay, well, screw you. I'll go to ILM. So he went to ILM. They told him the same thing. So they came to me and they said, well, what do you think? I said, yeah, it's possible. It's only time and money, and if you got the money, I got the time. Unfortunately, that's kind of become a catchphrase of Jim Cameron's. He now says to everybody, if they hem and haw about whether they can do a shot, he goes, hey, I got the money, so you better make the time. So I apologize to all visual effects artists around the world for that. But the thing about that shot was it just took a long, long time. Literally 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2.5 months. All I did was look at this one shot. The night that I finished this shot, I never wanted to see Kate Winslet's face ever again. And because literally the faces are completely hand-painted. There's no 3D. It was all done 2D. I went to see a movie, and there was a trailer playing before the movie. And the very first shot of the trailer was Kate Winslet in slow motion running at me. It's like, can't stand it. Anyway, so did the shot, and I was at a party with Jim Cameron after the movie released, and he came up to me and he said, you know why that shot was so hard, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I hand-painted the whole thing. And he goes, no, it's not because of that. That's just tech geek shit. He said, there's another reason why it was so hard. He said, it's never been done before. And it turned out the reason why I was having so much difficulty and it was taking 2.5 months was that it was literally the very first time anybody had ever done a head replacement in a movie or a TV show or anything. And now they're done all the time. and technology has been invented to make it much easier. But it was kind of a groundbreaking thing, and it allowed stunt people to be more involved and directors to do shots that they could never do before, and it allowed visual effects guys to kind of be heroes without anybody really knowing it. I was working with Jim. A couple of years later, we did another movie about the Titanic. It's an IMAX documentary called Ghosts of the Abyss, about actually going down to the wreckage of the ship. One of the things they did on this that was very cool was they did a little science experiment. You know what like a styrofoam coffee cup looks like a normal cup about this big. They got those, and they got a Sharpie, and they drew a picture of the Titanic on the outside of it, and then they put them, like 10 of them, in a mesh bag on the outside of the sub, so in the water. So you combine a styrofoam cup and James Cameron and visual effects supervisor John Bruno, and then put them in a custom-built sub, go down 12,500 feet below the ocean. Bitterly cold, but that 12,500 feet of water pressure is so extreme by the time it gets to the bottom, and they were literally going all the way down to the bridge, which no longer looked like that. The bridge kind of looks like this now. But the sub went right up to the edge of the bridge, and they unhooked the bag, and they put it on the deck, and they swam away, and they just let it sit there for 10 minutes. And then they hooked it back on, and they went back to the surface. When it came back, this is what it looks like. It's literally this big. All the air has been squeezed out of it. So there's 9 of these in the world. I've got one. A couple of other friends have them. Jim has some, and there's one in the Smithsonian. So the next film was Armageddon after that as compositing supervisor. It was a very big, challenging project. We were, like it says, destroying cities with miniatures and matte paintings. We had a very large budget. We had a $40 million visual effects budget for this film. So one of the miniatures we built was this 40-foot long miniature of the shuttle. It was actually, so there's an 8-foot miniature in front of that. The thing was so big you could actually sit inside it, which we used to every day and have lunch, so we could hide from the crew. There's me in the middle, lining up a shot for it. And then I got the big call, the call I'd waited for since I was 19. I got the call to go up to ILM and work on Master and Commander, directed by this guy, Peter Weir, who had directed Picnic at Hanging Rock all those years, back in '75, that has inspired me. I was there for a 4-week gig, and I thought I was going to leave after that, and they kept me, and I ended up being there for 4.5 years, and I did 17 movies with ILM. And they were all just ridiculously huge films, at least from a visual effects content point of view, and fulfilled a lifetime dream of working on Star Wars. I don't know how many of you know Mission Impossible 3 really well, but that scene that's in the demo reel of him flying his parachute around Shanghai, there's not one frame of that sequence that's actually shot in Shanghai. The entire city's digital, because JJ wanted the flight path to be very specific, and it couldn't be specific based on where the buildings were, so he was going, well, we'll put that building over there, and we'll put that building over there, and so they just changed it all. Jarhead and Narnia. I'm in there somewhere. Over in the middle. Did all the Yoda holograms. I worked out the look development for that, and then I comped most of the shots. In this shot, George used to do these shots called Frank and George's, where he would shoot multiple takes, and then he'd come to us and say, I want you to use all takes and make a new shot. So use Hayden from one, and use her from another one, and use that hand from another one. The problem with his hand was that it didn't fit, and the fingers all disappeared. So we needed to get new fingers. So it's Hayden Christensen's thumb, but it's my hand. So I kludged my fingers into that to make a full hand. So my son likes to say that I'm the hand of Darth Vader and of Bart Simpson. Yes, my son's a total geek as well. I was comping this shot, and they had completely forgotten to shoot the element of Emperor Palpatine for the hologram. But that day, all the wardrobe had arrived from Sydney. So I said, well, give me the wardrobe. And so I threw it on and stood on a picnic table out by the parking lot. We shot it with a little HD camera, and that's me in the suit. Doesn't look quite as impressive for real. We needed great coffee, and so ILM has its own coffee shop, and yes, indeed, it's called Java the Hutt. It was great coffee. Hanging out with Darth Vader and R2 at the Christmas party. One of the cool things about working at ILM is that we got to meet some really incredible people. And then since then, just amazing people who'd always been heroes of mine. Ray Harryhausen, who, the greatest stop-motion animator in the planet. He, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and just amazing movies. Met Ray a few times. It was a great pleasure. Doug Trumbull, who directed Silent Running and supervised 2001. Terry Jones from Monty Python. Who doesn't want to meet Monty Python? Robin Williams, one of the sweetest people I knew. Sid Mead, who designed Blade Runner. Even Fozzie Bear. He was actually made for me by Henson's, and I have him at the house. He's just mine to play with. Working with him was even better. I worked with Stephen on War of the Worlds, and we came up with some really insane stuff for him. With George, when he was my boss, working on Revenge of the Sith. With JJ on Mission Impossible. Eric Idle for a little kids movie, Thomas and the Magic Railroad. Michael Douglas a couple of years ago on Las Vegas. Hanging out with Han Solo in the model shop. I really did think Chewie was taller than that. There's Peter Mayhew, who's the original Chewbacca, and he's in the new movie as well. It was our last day at ILM before we moved down to the Presidio in San Francisco. It's they've been there about 10 years now, but a beautiful new facility. But the old facility where they shot Ghostbusters and E.T. and all these great old films, it was a great place. Next film for me was Rush Hour 3. We shot in Paris for a month. I shot on the Eiffel Tower every night for a month. The only way I could do that was as an employee of the Eiffel Tower. So I would hand them my California driver's license, and they would hand me an ID card, and I'd get to go anywhere I wanted on the Eiffel Tower each night. Working with Chris and Jackie and Max von Sydow, who's the old priest in The Exorcist. It was our last day on the green screen. We shot so much green screen. There's a lot of it in the demo reel of the guys swinging around. It was just an insanely complex shoot. ILM did all the visual effects for us. Sun Ming Ming, who was in the film, this guy has shoes, literally size 25 shoes. They are massive shoes. This is our camera rig. It was hanging right out over the edge of the Eiffel Tower. So these guys are just out in midair on safety cables and insanely dangerous. John, who was the other supervisor on the show, was doing our laundry in Paris. This is our green screen stage at Culver Studios in Los Angeles. Cool thing about this stage, it's stage 16 at Culver Studios, and it's the same stage that they had the Bat Cave for the old Adam West Batman TV series. Lining up some stills for Jackie for a digital double. Later on that day, I had Chris Tucker come in, and we were taking all these photos of him, and he goes, "So, Ad, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we're making this digital double of you so that if there are any stunts that are really dangerous, you don't have to do them. We'll just do it with a CG character." And I said, "But the cool thing is that we can now make toys out of this." And he said, "Hold on a second. Are you telling me that you could make a toy of me?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "You have to do that." And I said, "I'm not going to do that because you just stay home and play with yourself all day." He said, we made him one, and he did. This is our green screen stage for the Eiffel Tower. It was only 40 feet square, and then ILM put in all the rest of the tower. All the way through the show, John and I never had a chair to sit on for like the 4 months that we were shooting it. So we stood for 4 months. And everybody else had chairs with their names on it. And so on the very last day, they came in with 2 chairs, and they both had both of our names on it, flopped. So it was like, yeah, funny joke, guys. After that, the next big project for me was Harry Potter. The Wizarding World of Harry Potter is the theme park ride based on Harry Potter. So we did all of the pre-ride work of the talking portraits, but then we also did the ride. The castle is actually being built in Los Angeles now, and it's opening next year. What the audience get to see from ground level is Hogwarts Castle. What you don't get to see from the air is that it's actually hiding a 65,000 square foot facility that houses the ride. And the ride was just state-of-the-art work using projection domes and real sets and animatronics and you name it, it's all in there. With Dumbledore and Hermione and Hagrid. Sitting in the Great Hall. The Great Hall had no ceiling, even though it did in the movies. The movies were always added as a CG addition. Outside Dumbledore's office. shooting the fat lady, where she's trying to sing a high note and shatter the glass and impress everybody, but she can't hit the note, so she just smashes the glass. Using this Milo motion control rig. We're shooting Hagrid here, but we actually used it as well to shoot Harry. It's one of the scariest days of my entire career, watching this rig move past Dan at like 30 miles an hour, 2 feet from his head. And just thinking, please don't kill the star, that would be very bad. But he was a real trooper, he was a great guy. And he's very short. Or maybe I'm very tall, I don't know, one of the two. We had a full mock-up at our studio in Santa Maria in Central California, and we would project all the imagery into that every day, and that was our dailies. Instead of sitting in a theater, we stood in a dome, and we had to hold on to the handrail because it was kind of disconcerting to see all this motion going. You'd fall over if you didn't hold on. That's what you're sitting on the end of when you ride the ride. It's called a kuka arm, and you are literally being thrown around all over the place to create false sense of G-force and you name it. We created the illusions. This is the castle under construction in Florida. This is pretty much what the one in Los Angeles looks like right now. And one of the final frames from the Quidditch match. Florida gets really hot. It was like stinking hot when we were out there doing this. So next project for me was The Social Network. I was called in by a friend to help him because he had all of the computer screens. It started off with maybe 20 computer screens that they wanted to have comped. And then David Fincher decided, I want to comp all the screens. So there were 3 of us. It's the smallest crew we've ever had. Three artists, 480 shots, 8 weeks. We just worked around the clock. We were doing like 22-hour days for 8 weeks. Crazy. We comped all the shots and got it all done. So from little screens in his dorm room to in the Facebook office, every single screen that you see in that movie is a composite. And Fincher's DP, his director of photography, loves this kind of riding focus. So focus never just sits there. It's always kind of in and out a little bit, and so we had to match all of that. Wolverine, a lot of superhero fans here. Wolverine was great. I ended up doing all of the blades coming out of his hand for this film. And these ones are actually real blades that he's holding onto. He's got a little wooden appliance inside his hand, and the blades loop up around his finger. But for all the ones where they were growing out of his hands, we animated all that stuff. Okay, getting back to bad projects. Not all the films you can work on are really good. This is one of the worst ones I've ever worked on. But it was notable because we were shooting it in Montreal in the middle of winter, but it was doubling for New York in the summer. It was minus 45, shooting at night outside, freezing our asses off every night. And all the extras were supposed to be walking down the street in the summer in New York, so they were wearing shorts and flip-flops and T-shirts and freezing to death. Very ugly project. But got to work with Newman from Seinfeld, so that was cool. Sometimes communication doesn't quite work. We asked them for a 12-foot by 12-foot green screen for a shot through the front window of a truck. It was going to be really simple. And they took 2 weeks to get back to us. And when they finally got back to me, they said, come look at the green screen. Okay. I expected to walk onto this stage and see a little 12 by a screen. They had greened out the entire stage and built this huge lighting rig. So we thought, well, rather than waste it, we have to blow up all these heads and blow up bodies and kill people in this movie. So we just lined up all these prosthetic bodies all the way down the wall with squibs and explosions in them, and we just blew them all up. And the green screen was covered in blood, but it worked. This is one of the shots from the film. It's a good old rubber head effect. We literally just had a rubber head, and it's me jamming a leg of a chair into the eyeball. Another kind of dodgy film. Yeah. Also in the heat of summer. It was 117 degrees and 95% humidity. And we were shooting outside. It was okay for us because I was kind of dressed like this. But the cast were wearing suits of armor and chainmail and fur and leather. And it was awful. But working with Nick Cage and Ron Perlman, who were both great to work with. And then unknown in Berlin. Berlin in winter, doubling as Berlin in winter. Who knew? We actually shot this car off the edge of the bridge as a real stunt. They made the entire body, they took the engine out, made the entire body of the car airtight, and stuck it on an air cannon, down on the far edge of the bridge, and we got permission from the Berlin City Council to take the railings down off the side of the fence. And we built our own fake railing with fake stonework. And then we shot the cannon, and the car shot across the road over the edge into the water. Unfortunately, it was so powerful that it blew the skylight out of the car. So we had to add that back in as a compositing CG gag. And when all the styrofoam blocks hit the water, they all started bobbing and floating, so we had to sink them into the water as well. So it became a big compositing shot. Sometimes it's very, very low tech on set. Had my little camera just duct taped to the side of a street light. Other times we go to kind of ridiculous heights. This is at the big monument there, and I was up there, and again it was minus 45, like 75 mile an hour winds in a 140-foot crane. We do crazy things to get our shots sometimes. Minus 45, I will never forget that. These boots are rated to minus 100, and we needed them. Working with Liam in that show. My kids, meanwhile, they've grown up. Worked on a few more movies. Twilight, most recently. All the shots in the Cullen house for Twilight are all green screen. We actually built 2 houses. I'm not sure if I've got the photo. Yeah, I do have the photos here. We built one house on stage in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. And then we built the exact same house in a forest north of Vancouver. And it was very bizarre to spend like 7 months on a green screen stage inside this house. Just every time you walked up the staircase, looking out the window and seeing the cement floor and green screen. And then we went up to the house in the forest, and Bill Condon, the director, and I were walking up the staircase the first day, and we looked out the window, and there's a real forest out there. And it's like, it's crazy. Unfortunately, the studio decided to cheap out a little bit, and they said, well, we're only going to build 2 stories of the house, because it's going to cost an extra $20,000 to build the 3rd story. You can just do it as a visual effect. They ended up spending $250,000 on all the visual effects shots to add the 3rd floor. So hanging out with this guy backstage, kind of ugly. Next project for me was Cosmos. I'd loved the original series in 1980 when Carl Sagan did it, and then I was invited to come and be the visual effects supervisor for this version. And so I worked out all the methodology for the show and how to shoot it and how to make it look, and we designed all the looks for the series, and it was really fun. I helped design the Ship of the Imagination, and I did this comp. I actually did the comp myself of Neil in the Big Bang, and helped design the Cosmic Calendar. It went on to win a couple of Emmys, so that was cool. This is shooting some stuff for it up in Vancouver. Blowing stuff up. You can tell from my demo reel, we love blowing stuff up. Blowing it up, burning it, just destroying things. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's the host of the show. And then while we were doing it, the show had a weird connection. I don't know if you guys know, but Seth MacFarlane, who's the creator of Family Guy, was the executive producer of Cosmos. Turns out that he's the world's largest Carl Sagan fan. And so I was working with him on Cosmos, and he was hosting the Oscars that year. And he said, look, come and work with me on the Oscars. I want to do some effects stuff for that. So I did. We were shooting this day, and while we were shooting, I looked out the window, and right out the back of the theater where the Oscars happened is this skanky little hotel that I'd lived in back in 1990. And that's the hotel room I stayed in, and I remember looking out that window thinking, God, it'd be really cool to work in Hollywood one day. So, 20-odd years later, I was working there on the Oscars, looking back at the same room. So the most recent project for me, big feature, was Birdman. Birdman's done really well for a little independent film. It's got 9 Academy Award nominations. I'm actually in the movie as well. You can see me standing there to the right of Michael Keaton as he runs naked, almost naked, through Times Square. Hanging out with Birdman, getting him ready for his shot. This is the photo double that we used on set. And then Rodeo Effects in Montreal projection mapped Michael Keaton's face onto the lower half so that it could be Michael Keaton talking to Michael Keaton. Chivo probably the greatest director of photography on the planet. He won the Oscar for Gravity last year. He's going to win the Oscar on the 22nd for this. This is a still from the film. If you go and see the film, you see me running behind him with my camera up in the air. The whole movie was shot with Steadicam and handheld cameras, and one of the gags about the movie is that it's supposed to be one continuous shot. So there's no cuts like a normal film. It just keeps on going and going and going as one shot. So my job was to help make that work.
Background action, and action.
You look so old at first.
That guy actually did that stunt. He just ran off the roof. He was on a descender rig, but he still ran off an 8-story building and in the center of New York. It was crazy. So this is the director and the cast. It was our last day of shooting at the St. James Theatre in New York. It was a long day. Hanging out with Michael. How cool is this guy? The 3 Bs, Beetlejuice, Batman, and Birdman. And he's going to win the Oscar this year for Best Actor. So very cool. With Emma Stone, who's a total sweetheart to work with. So just 2 nights ago in Los Angeles, we won the award for the Visual Effects Society for Best Supporting Visual Effects, which is actually the hardest award to win because it's the most invisible shots, and so we got nominated and we won, which was great. So I'm a member of multiple organizations, Visual Effects Society, still the Television Academy, CIFA, that's the International Association of Animation Producers, and the Australian Academy of Cinema Television Arts. And then the last film I did was a little film for Hallmark Hall of Fame, which we shot in Canada. It was about a family who bring up a family of swans. So we had real swans and CG swans and puppet swans, you name it. We used every trick in the book. This guy, Dave, who was the main trainer of the real swans. The swan's name's Louise. The 2 swans were called Thelma and Louise. Dave trained all the owls in Harry Potter. He's trained, you name it, any animal he can train. He's a genius. We spent a lot of time on the water shooting things. I came up with this look called Swan Cam. And so the camera was mounted right at the level of the swan's head, and we were just swimming through the water like it was the swan's point of view. Just shooting some stills for the show on a very rainy day when we were shooting a funeral sequence. And I'm working with baby swans. I mean, how cool does that get? They were so cute. They were about 6 weeks old here. This is our second unit. I directed the second unit on this as well. So it was just a great bunch of people. And our real swan. And so this location is also one of the locations that they use in the new TV series, Fargo. But they shoot that in the winter, so we got the better deal shooting in the summer. So, what's the best advice I can offer you? This is the most important one. Never give up. Somebody asked me earlier on tonight, what would you tell somebody out of this crowd who wants to get into film? And I said, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to tell you you can't do it, and it's not going to work, and give up because it's a lost dream. Never give up. Because if you give up, no one else is going to pick you up and keep going. Dream very, 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 very big dreams. Because nothing is impossible, truly. I mean, I proved that. Coming from Australia, with not a hope in hell of getting jobs on the shows that I wanted to work on, I ended up working on everything I wanted to work on. So, you can do it. Always believe in yourself. Never stop learning. It's part of what this event is about. So, I praise you all for being here. And this one's important to me, and it gets back to why I had my mentors at the beginning. Always remember the people who influenced and helped you along the way. And make sure that you thank them for it while they're still alive. You know, once people are gone, you don't get the opportunity to thank them. So if you can, thank them. And then this last one is just do the best to inspire others. It's why I come today. Hopefully I can, inspire some of you to maybe get a job in the film and television industry. And that's it. So really, that's my story. Thanks for inviting me to speak. It's been great to be here. Actually, keep doing that. Keep doing that, because a mate of mine in LA told me I have to get a selfie with all of you. Love you guys. Okay, hang on. I'm just going to put this on and see if we get any questions. Bruno's back.
Bem, pessoal, vocês já conhecem, né? Se for fazer pergunta em inglês, avisa para ele poder tirar o fone de ouvido. Se for fazer português, faz em português que eu tá ouvindo a tradução, tá? Beleza? Tem o pessoal que está com os microfones. Cadê a galera com o microfone? Quem está com o microfone aqui? Vamos lá. Tá aqui, já está aqui. Beleza, valeu. E só antes de começar. E eu tô aqui, a gente não tem muitas perguntas, mas sem que alguém quiser levantar a mão, levanta para mim que eu vou setar. Beleza.
Adam, recently we had a problem. I hear him. You hear me? Recently we had a problem.
No,
with
wait. You have to.
Yeah, it's in English. Recently we had a problem with the Rhythm and Hughes team that made the Laugh of Pi. Do you remember that? They were having problems. They asked for help. Do this affect you also, or only it was only their company, and why this is happening? Tell us why this is happening.
O microfone dele não está funcionando. Oi? Peraí. Just a sec. Yeah. They're looking there. Yeah. No.
You can tell us why this is happening?
Well, one of the things that happened with Rhythm and Hughes was that the studio changed the scope of work that they were asking the company to do. And so they said, we're not going to put more money into the film. You have to go and get the money to do the extra shots, even though the studio was the one asking for it. So they got the money, and it was millions of dollars of extra money, and they did the work, and then the studio wouldn't pay them for it. And then the studio also, Rhythm and Hughes had some other films coming up, and they were going to be able to make out the rest of their year on those projects. But right as they were about to start them, as Life of Pi was finishing, all of those different projects got pushed an entire year. And so they lost all the money, they lost all the work, and they went bankrupt. And they literally went bankrupt the day after they won the Oscar, which was horrible. And it's happening to a lot of companies. I mean, outsourcing has changed the world a lot.
All of the visual effects industry used to be based in Los Angeles, and now it's Australia, New Zealand, UK, Germany, Canada, everywhere. So,
Yeah, it's a changing business.
anybody else have a question?
You there? Yeah.
Alô. Oi, Adam, boa noite. Bom, primeiramente, obrigado. Bom, Adam, boa noite. Primeiramente, obrigado pela sua presença.
Thank you.
Bom, obrigado pela sua presença. Eu sou um fã do mercado de computação gráfica, né? Tenho acompanhado desde muito novo. Tinha um programa passado na TV no Discovery Channel que mostrava os efeitos especiais do cinema e mostrava exatamente isso que você mostrou. Bom, o que eu queria saber é o seguinte, atualmente, nessa mesma fase que aconteceu esse problema com os protestos, né, e a indústria sofreu esse impacto com o filme de aventuras de Pi, houve uma fusão, a escola Normal School a Noman School, que é uma escola do Alex, tinha acabado de fechar uma parceria aqui com o Brasil, escolheu o Brasil, sorte pra gente, né? E foi justo nessa época. Eu gostaria de saber o que você acha do mercado brasileiro, tem muitos artistas indo para fora, se aqui ainda é um lugar muito promissor e que os americanos pensam a respeito dos artistas brasileiros.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that blew me away, I only arrived at 1:30 this afternoon. I went straight to the hotel, had a shower, and then I came here. So I haven't spent a long time. It's my first time in Brazil. But driving through the city, one of the things that amazed me was just the graffiti artwork. The quality of artwork that I've seen just in that one realm is astoundingly beautiful. And, you know, if there are people in Brazil who are capable of doing film work at that kind of quality, then I think it's an amazing thing. The thing is that good film artists don't come from one place. Good film artists come from anywhere in the world. And, you know, whether they're an animator or a compositor, it doesn't really matter. I mean, either you have the eye and you know how to make something look real, or you don't. And, you know, I think there are going to be an incredible number of people, even as here today, who have the ability to go and do that. So, yes, I think it's a huge market, and I applaud anybody who's trying to get into it. And I think, you know, also pushing the business within Brazil, not just thinking about, you know, coming from Brazil and working overseas, but create the business here as well and start up the film industry. And yes, the Noman tying in with Brazil was great, but, you know, promote the Brazilian film industry as well, which should be done.
Ok, beleza. Pessoal, só a gente acelerar na pergunta aí, senão a gente não vai ter tempo para fazer. A gente tem na fila ele, depois é o rapaz aqui, duas cadeiras para frente, depois é ela e depois é ele aqui. Oi? Você que vai fazer a pergunta. É ele, depois você.
So, I've been to Florida last year and I experienced the Hogwarts Quidditch match, and actually it's an amazing experience. It actually made me a little bit sick, which is hard to do. And I wanted to know what was the biggest difficulty you guys had to create that experience.
The biggest difficulty with that thing was that when you go into those projection domes, when you're watching Harry and Ron flying around Hogwarts and then flying through the Quidditch match and flying through the cave at the end, the dome, you're literally sitting inside a 20-foot hemispherical dome. And we were projecting into that dome, but normally you would have a dome and you would project from the center straight in, but because the audience was going to be sitting right in the center, we couldn't put the projector in the center. So the projector is actually hanging 18 inches from the top of a 20-foot drop, and so we had the lens. We had a custom-built $45,000 lens, and there's 35 of them because there's 35 units traveling all at the same time. And it's offset so that it splays the image down into the dome. But for those of you who understand photography, there's a 4-stop difference between the light at the top of the dome and the light at the bottom. So when we were rendering all these images, we had to work out how to create an image that would be bright enough at the bottom to match the brightness at the top. And so the final rendered images look really bizarre. You can't really look at them and think, oh, that looks good, because it looks like crap. But when you project it into the dome, it looks real. And we were trying to work out the displacement of the image to unwrap into the dome, and we actually ended up hiring a rocket scientist to come in and write code for us, and he worked with us for a year writing code just to be able to get that image into the dome and make it look right. So that was the hardest one.
Beleza, o próximo, vai lá.
Adam, one of the things I noticed that really stuck with me is that you got into the industry right into the beginning of the the beginning of the computers and the digital revolution during the compositing and VFX scene. So technically, you had no formal training in digital painting. They just came up with the paint box, and you had to learn it all by yourself. Was it really hard to get into this new world of digital painting, or did you just sort of figure it out and went on?
Well, the beauty of it was that there was no benchmark. There was no reference point for that at all, because no one had ever done it before. And I didn't actually think about this until a couple of years ago, but I didn't realize at the time that every time I did a new job, I was kind of setting a new style of how to do something, as were the other 4 artists around the planet. So, you know, it was trial by fire. We learnt on the job, and we were kind of creating a brand new workflow every day. And, you know, now kids go to school and they learn, and they learn from all of our mistakes, but we had to make them and hopefully not get fired in the process.
Boa noite. Você tem uma carreira brilhante e eu queria saber agora o que te inspira, quais são os seus sonhos?
Oh, what inspires me now? Everybody. I actually, one thing that I wanted to say about all of you guys, because you guys inspire me. I was talking to somebody earlier on tonight, actually Alex from Eagle Moss, and we were talking about the power that one person has to change the world. And you know, I look out at this room and I see the personalities and the brains that are behind all of you. And if one person can go out and do something and you know, invent something that makes something better for somebody around the world, and then can become a very big thing. There's 8,000 of you here. If one person can do that, imagine what 8,000 of you can do. You know, my inspiration is seeing people coming to things like this who want to create new stuff and want to make the world a better place and a more fun place. You know, in film, I'm still inspired by people like Spielberg and J.J. Abrams and I don't know, all of those old school guys. But I love seeing some of the stuff that's happening in gaming. Gaming is a really new frontier for filmmakers. And, you know, I think that you kind of need to be inspired by everything. I mean, if I see a really... I was driving in tonight and the car was stopped and I just saw a tree and the light was hitting the tree a really beautiful way. And I had to take a photograph because it's like, wow, that's really cool. You know, if I animated that, no one would believe me. So you find inspiration in all kinds of things. And I think you just keep on looking for that inspiration always. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask in English. So I was reading the other day about how Titanic was one of the last Hollywood movies to use matte painting. It got me thinking, what do you think is the place of practical effects right now in Hollywood? It's...
Oh, practical effects are here to stay. There are a lot of people who say to me, if I go on a show and they say, we're just going to do this all CG. And I say no. When I did Unknown with Liam Neeson in Berlin, the director initially, we had a huge car chase through the center of Berlin. And he wanted to do the entire thing as a green screen sequence. Because that was going to be comfortable for the stars, and we'd be on a stage and it'd be warm, and then I'd have to go through hell later on to make it all look real. But I looked at him and I said, look, we have the James Bond stunt driving team here. We have the ability, because of our budget, to get all the coolest camera rigs on the planet. We can build the coolest car rigs. Why don't we just do it for real? We'll mount cameras on the outside and we'll scare the shit out of the actors because it's real. And so we did that. And you know, there's one scene in the movie where Liam's driving the car and Diane Kruger's sitting next to him, and they do a 180-degree handbrake skid. And when we were shooting it, they did the skid. There's literally a guy sitting on top of the car with all the controls taken from where they would normally be onto the roof. He's driving the car from the roof, and Liam's pretending to drive inside, and the camera's mounted on the side so that it looks like Liam's driving. They do the skid, and there's this blood-curdling scream from Diane. And we waited for cut from the director, and the whole crew ran toward her. She gets out of the car and she goes, "That was not acting!" because she was scared to death. But that's the take that's in the movie because it worked. And you know, it's always about choosing the right tool. A lot of people think CG is the only way. CG is just another tool. And in some cases, like in Unknown also, when the hotel blows up, that's a miniature that we built in London. And we actually blew it up because when you finish shooting, it's done. We don't have to comp anything. We don't have to build any assets and do anything. It's just, sometimes it's the best way.
Bem, pessoal, eu queria agradecer, tá certo, ao pessoal da Eagle Moss. Cadê a galera da Eagle Moss? Tá aí, não? Salva de palmas para o pessoal da Eagle Moss que trouxe ele aqui. Valeu. Eu só queria falar o seguinte, a Eagle Moss está lá fora. Eles têm estão demonstrando uma linha de miniaturas de super-heróis e tudo mais. Então, quem curte esse tipo de coisa, dá um pulo na Eagle Moss. Foram eles que trouxeram o Adam aqui. Valeu. Falou, galera. Obrigadíssimo. Valeu.